Hey everybody, welcome to the Drix Perspective. I, of course, am Drix himself. Today I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The modern audience in entertainment fandom today would make you think that the Star Wars prequels are the worst abomination and calamity that has ever been birthed out of a movie studio. But why is it that 25 years later, I cannot stop thinking about Episode 1? Now, there's quite a bit that I appreciate about this movie, but in this video, I'm going to touch mainly on the sound design, the cinematography, and of course, we cannot forget the iconic lightsaber battle, Duel of the Fates. I'm also going to be sprinkling in some fun facts that I find interesting, and maybe you know about them, maybe you don't, maybe you'll learn something new, maybe you know all of this already, maybe you love this movie just as much as I do, but either way, I'm really glad you're here, so let's get started. So to set the stage, I want to give you a brief introduction to how I was introduced to Star Wars. So I grew up on this double cul-de-sac street that had a ton of kids, and one of the houses, I would consider them today a Star Wars family. I just didn't know what that meant yet. So one day I was at that house visiting my friend, and I went downstairs to get a drink, and I noticed that the dad was watching a movie that I'd never seen before. I didn't recognize, but I didn't really think anything of it, and I ran back upstairs. But later on, I would continuously come downstairs to get a snack or a Little Debbie's. You know how it goes back in the day, right? Just shoving your face with zebra cakes and Star Crunch. I kept looking around the corner and watching this movie. And it turns out it was The Empire Strikes Back. And every time I'd come downstairs, I stayed just a little bit longer. But then the Battle of Hoth came on, and I literally just sat down and asked the dad, "Can I watch this?" And he said yes. It was from that moment forward that I was just hooked. I had never been that infatuated with something until I had that eureka moment of watching that movie, and I wanted to know everything about it. So, as you can imagine, when I learned that a movie was coming out in theaters, a Star Wars movie, my first Star Wars theater experience, you can understand the amount of joy and amount of, nostalgia today that means to me and that meant to me as a child. So I just thought that was important to kind of give you an idea where my headspace is at as I'm talking through this video, kind of give you a little bit of an insight into how I got started with Star Wars, right? And what it means to me and why it is so important to me. So really appreciate you clicking on this video. Let's continue. Now I want to kick this video off and talk about one of the most redeeming qualities of the Star Wars prequels era, especially in Episode 1. And that's gotta be the sound design. It's kind of funny because the sound design aspect of the prequels, it's something kind of everyone just generally agrees upon. And, I'm speaking about prequels being controversial to be liked in general. So I get it. There's a camp out there that thinks it's the worst thing that's ever been made. That's totally fine. But for the most part, everyone kind of agrees that the prequel sound design was just top notch. I think everyone kind of knows where I'm going with this when I'm talking about sound design. And it's got to be the pod racers and the ships as number one. This is something that the prequels did across the entire trilogy well. And every single ship that is a different ship design has a different sound design. You just really don't see that too often these days. These vehicles, these trucks, cars, spaceships, whatever, there's not really like a distinct sound associated with them. In Episode 1, George Lucas and Ben Burtt give each ship its own unique sound. So once you hear it and you see it for the first time, you could just close your eyes and never have to see it again, but you could know that it's about to come on screen or even hear it and recognize it off screen just based on the sound of the ship alone. I think one of the scenes in this film that actually this is most prominent has got to be pod racing. I remember hearing those pods all fire their engines up for the first time, and that just, man, that like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Hearing that each of them had their own unique sound, I just kind of latched onto them individually, and I thought each individual one was kind of cool in its own way. Pod racing, fun fact. This one's a bit of a two-for-one. During the Boonta Eve pod race scene, those far-away shots of the audience from the crowd when they're sweeping, showing the first few seconds of that scene, some of those people are just colored cotton swabs. And then you have the mastermind behind the sound design, Ben Burt, going to real San Francisco 49ers football games and recording the live crowd reactions and then applying them to sections of this pod race scene.
Oh no! It's Bumpy Roost into the pits!
We can't talk about pod racing sound design without talking about Sebulba's Pod Racer. Because, dear God, that thing used to scare the crap out of me when I was a kid. Even playing the game, I remember, if you guys remember on N64, there was Star Wars Pod Racer, but that hulking, thumping bass tone when he would come up flying by you, even in theater, I remember hearing the entire theater shake because of that sound. And that just goes to show you how much sound design can add to the experience, whether it's in theater or at home. So I just wanted to throw in a little tidbit about the pod racing section. So I don't know if you can tell, but if you listen closely to each of the different pods themselves, there's actual real world examples of like vehicle sounds, engine sounds, jets, planes, helicopters, all kind of being blended together to give these, pod racers these unique sounds. And I think that kind of just goes to show how creative Ben Burt was when he came to designing the sound of episode 1 and all of the things inside of episode 1. One of my favorite locations that I think we visit that actually really showcases the use of sound design and these ambient sounds perfectly has got to be Coruscant. For whatever reason, just throughout my life, whether it's in video games, TV shows, movies, I've always been drawn to these gigantic, dystopian, futuristic, post-apocalyptic, you name it, type cities where it's just a massive, expansive landscape. And Coruscant has this hustle and bustle. Like, it reminds me of if Las Vegas was in the air. There's ships zooming by in all different directions. There's multiple elevations. There's elevators and lifts and spaceports and pads, landing pads. There's just so much going on. It makes the world just feel alive and feel full. And it's not just Coruscant. It's all of the locations and all these sets and all these different places that we travel to when we're following these characters. I mean, even the Senate chamber. The Senate chamber. There's these echoes and there's these murmurs of people and these metal sounds and mechanical noises and these floating pods.
The chair recognizes the senator from the sovereign system of Naboo.
There's this immersion that it makes you feel. And Ben Burt just does an amazing job throughout this film creating and capturing that verisimilitude. Also, I just wanted to throw in one more sound design, quote-unquote, fun fact that might actually upset some people because I know this is a controversial character, but hey, this one's for the haters. Jar Jar Binks, voiced and played by Ahmad Best. That is right. That is Ahmad Best's real voice that has been altered and given kind of a unique alien quality while still retaining his actual vocal performance. So next time you see Jar Jar, cut him a break. Come on. So down in the comments below, I want to hear from y'all. I'm curious, what are some of your favorite sounds from movies and TV shows? I don't care if it's a cartoon, anime, whatever. It can be a character, a voice, a weapon, a ship. we've got 25 years of content since this movie came out. So post about it. I want to hear about it. Now, look, I could spend the entire video rambling just on sound design alone. And honestly, I don't want to put you guys through that because that might not be as interesting. But I can tell you right now, visuals and cinematography are. These are the backbone of this movie and the Star Wars prequel trilogy. One of my biggest pet peeves that I see today in film and television is got to be just this abusive use of green screen and CGI and just renders, and nothing can be real anymore. And you know what? I miss the crap out of that. I miss just filming on a real set in a real place. We're CGIing weapons in people's hands nowadays. What happened to props and real practical effects? That has got to be one of the strongest characteristics of the Star Wars prequels, specifically starting with the Phantom Menace. I strongly believe, and of course this is just my opinion, but I believe the Star Wars prequels are one of the, if not the best use of blending practical effects with CG.
When the camera pans over to look out this archway, we want to have filled that archway full of tanks and battle droids. So it's a relatively straightforward shot.
So if you haven't noticed, when you watch The Phantom Menace, a lot of these scenes, the locations that they're actually in, they seem real, right? They seem like these people are in a place that actually exists, and that's because they do. Now, of course, there are some outliers like Coruscant and the city of Otogunga, things like that, where these places don't actually exist anywhere in the world, and they had to be created digitally. But I want to talk about Tatooine and Naboo.
How are you doing?
I'm cool for now. Just waiting for it to get hot.
Tatooine, for example, in this film was filmed in a real location. This was filmed in Tunisia, and I thought this was an important place for them to actually do this, having a real set, because Tatooine is the most iconic planet in Star Wars to me. I mean, I know people that might not even know what Star Wars is that have probably heard the word Tatooine before. It's in the TV shows, it's in the movies, there's comic books about it, there's action figures with sets from Tatooine. It is the planet, right, where a lot of these movies and shows are based upon. And the reason that I love this was filmed in a real place is it just captures that harsh desert vibe, that atmosphere, the sandstorm coming in and them running back to the ship and just showing how desolate it is. They're able to actually pull back in those shots, that camera, and show a vast, this is a gigantic, desolate place that they're in, and they're not on these 10, 12-foot sound stages where they're zoomed in on people's faces and it's got this claustrophobic vibe, which I hate that. And that's so prevalent in today's shows, especially the Disney Plus shows. I mean, the on-location shots, that's what makes Star Wars Star Wars. Having those zoomed out camera views, that gives you a sense of scale. Where is that today? Now, while we're talking about the visuals in this film, I think it's important to point out, and I'll use Tatooine for example. George Lucas does such a good job at playing with colors when it comes to giving each planet. You remember how we talked about there being different sounds representative of different ships and pod racers, things like that? He kind of does the same thing with colors as far as what planet or what location you're in. For example, Tatooine, drab, boring, neutral colors, right? The color grading in this planet sucks because the place sucks. It is slavery ridden. It is crime ridden. There's poverty. No one there is having a good time. And on the other side of that coin, you have a place like Naboo. Naboo's freaking gorgeous, man. Have you seen it lately? It's freaking gorgeous. There's rich, vibrant colors the blues, the reds, the greens. There's just this sense of prosperity and peace, and everyone there is just doing so much better than everyone else. And just that color palette, George does such a good job adding color palettes to places to kind of just aid with that visual storytelling and that thematic contrast. It's just, when you leave Tatooine and you go to a place like Naboo, you kind of go I don't ever want to go back to that other place. Like, have you seen this new place? Like, it's freaking amazing here. Why the hell would anyone want to go back there? That's just a great way of using colors to kind of tell a story as well as what you're actually seeing and understanding from the characters themselves. Now, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because Star Wars and lightsaber duels go hand in hand, right? It is one of the most iconic weapons that is even in existence today across the entertainment industry. And the lightsaber duels in the Phantom Menace are some of the most iconic and memorable in the entire Star Wars saga. And yes, we were introduced to the lightsaber in the original trilogy, but it's more of an introduction with some kind of basic fighting, I think. Like, the duels aren't, they're iconic, but they're not super interesting as far as like from a choreography standpoint goes. And I think they just completely crank that up to a 15 out of 10 when you enter episode 1. And it's not just the choreography that's turned up, but like the fights just feel a little bit more violent and raw, and there's power behind these strikes, and the aid of the sound and the visuals that go along with it. Like, these hits feel like hits, like you would expect a lightsaber to feel, look, and sound like. Lightsabers, fun fact. Nick Gillard and the stunt coordinator team blew through almost 300 aluminum lightsaber blades from both the Jedi and the Sith characters as they were doing these physical and intensive lightsaber duels throughout the entire filming of this movie. And we start seeing the characters develop their fighting styles. They all have these unique stances and moves that they start doing that you see across the trilogy. And we finally get to see a double-sided blade. And when Ray Park ignited that second blade in theater, everyone lost their freaking mind. Darth Maul, fun fact. So Maul didn't always have a dual blade lightsaber. He actually started out with a single blade during his initial training with Darth Sidious. And over the course of that training with Sidious, as he got stronger and smarter, he craved a more unique weapon. And that's what caused him to weld those two lightsaber hilts together to create the first version of the dual blade saber. But that wasn't the final version of it. Darth Sidious helped him refine it and perfect it over time and gave him the knowledge to create that final version that you see being utilized in episode 1. And of course, we cannot talk about lightsabers without talking about Duel of the Fates. It is the most intense lightsaber duel that I remember seeing on the big screen, even compared to the original trilogy or the sequels today. Nothing to me has even topped or come close to topping this fight. And I'm not going to mention a show that claimed that they did, but just saying, this remains peak lightsaber duels. One of those things that just stands out about Duel of the Fates compared to like any other duels has got to be that orchestral music that's playing in the background in sequence with the actual visuals that are happening. Like, that pairing is just like that is just like a fine wine and a steak. Like, it is just the perfect combination, and it captures the emotion and the fight you're seeing on screen. And then you have Ray Park as Darth Maul, who has this acrobatic and like just super aggressive fighting style, and he brings real martial arts kind of to the screen, and it just showcases his training and skill as a Sith apprentice, and he just brings it. It's just this super intense three-way duel between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul, and it's just non-stop until they finally reach those doors that slow the fight down, and everyone kind of gets this like intermission because it's that intense of a scene. And then those doors open back up and it just picks right back up with the music. It's beautifully done, and it is masterfully done. Darth Maul, fun fact number 2. The very first scene of the Phantom Menace that was actually filmed is the scene that features Darth Maul and Darth Sidious talking on the balcony at night in Coruscant. And that was actually the beginning of production of the film.
I've been well trained, my young apprentice. They will be no match for you.
And one of the things that I just love, because this is that, it's an extended fight scene. This is a scene that goes on for quite a bit. So you start noticing things between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, right? So Qui-Gon's got this kind of calm, measured combat style. And then you have Obi-Wan, who's a little bit younger. He's more aggressive and maybe sloppy in a way. And I just love that parallel between like master and apprentice. And I think this just showcases the difference of that perfectly on screen. The impact of these lightsaber duels, they extend beyond the film itself, right? Duel of the Fates, I think about this fight anytime I even see, sword fighting in a movie or fencing or something like that. It always kind of reminds me of Duel of the Fates. I start hearing that John Williams music in my head, and it just goes to show you how high of a standard that this is set. And it's left a lasting impression on me. And I'm just really grateful that this is my Star Wars. This is what I got to grow up with. I got Duel of the frickin' Fates in theater. And I don't hate where we are today with Star Wars, but I don't know how we got here from where we were. And so I just think about this movie, and I think about how lucky I am to have grown up in an era where this was considered my Star Wars. So as I begin to wrap this video up, I really just want to say thank you again if you stuck around this far. This is my first YouTube video, and sharing my love for Star Wars and for this movie is kind of helping me put myself out there and be a little bit vulnerable. But beyond the film itself, I just can't help but miss the excitement, of that release, like that community spirit and, those massive movie, release events that we used to get. Like when episode 1 was released, it was a phenomenon. It was a cultural, it took over everything. There was NASCAR shirts with pod racers on them. I know that because I have one hanging in my closet still today. Hollywood is really struggling today with these streaming style releases that you don't get that level of community and camaraderie anymore. These events don't exist anymore. And I crave that. I crave a time when we can experience that again. With all that being said, from the bottom of my heart, I just really want to say thank you for watching, and thank you for revisiting this movie with me. Maybe just scratching that nostalgia itch a little bit. This isn't by any means me trying to sell you on this movie. I'm totally fine if you don't like it. I'm not here to change your mind or anything like that, but just rather share what it means to me and why I love it. So again, if you have anything you want to share down in the comments, maybe your first episode 1 experience or your first Star Wars experience in general, please feel free to share. And if you have any video ideas you want to share as well, I'll take a look. And thank you, and talk to you next time.